The billionaire saw a homeless man who looked just like him. But when he learned the truth, Maxwell Rothschild III stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing down at the bustling streets of New York City. At 45, he was at the pinnacle of his career, a self-made billionaire whose tech empire, Innovate Tech, had revolutionized the industry. His salt-and-pepper hair and designer suits exuded power and confidence, while his piercing brown eyes seemed to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. Born to middle-class parents in suburban Chicago, Maxwell had always been driven. His father, a high school math teacher, and his mother, a librarian, had instilled in him a love for learning and a strong work ethic. But it was his grandmother, a child of the civil rights movement, who had shaped his worldview. "Never forget where you came from," she'd often say, and always reach back to help others up. Despite his grandmother's words, Maxwell had become increasingly disconnected from his roots. The higher he climbed, the more insulated he became from the realities of those less fortunate. His world now revolved around board meetings, charity galas, and exclusive social clubs. He donated to causes, yes, but it was always from a distance, a tax write-off more than a personal commitment. Maxwell's personal life was as carefully curated as his public image. Twice divorced, he had no children, his closest relationship being with his executive assistant, Sarah, who managed every aspect of his life with ruthless efficiency. He told himself he was happy, that he had everything he could ever want. But in quiet moments, a gnawing emptiness would creep in, a sense that something fundamental was missing. Across the city, in a very different part of town, Marcus Johnson huddled in the doorway of an abandoned building. At 43, Marcus's life was a far cry from the future he'd once imagined for himself. His worn face and calloused hands told the story of a man who'd faced more than his fair share of hardships. Once a promising young architect, Marcus had seen his dreams crumble in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. A series of personal tragedies, the death of his wife, a battle with addiction, the loss of his home, had left him on the streets, struggling to survive day by day. Despite the harshness of his circumstances, Marcus had never lost his dignity or his compassion. He was known among the homeless community for his willingness to share what little he had and for the sketches he would draw for passersby in exchange for spare change. His eyes, the same deep brown as Maxwell's, still held a spark of creativity and hope. Neither man could have imagined how their lives were about to intersect or the profound impact they would have on each other. As the sun set over New York City, setting the skyline ablaze with golden light, the stage was set for an encounter that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world around them. The day that would change both Maxwell and Marcus's lives forever began like any other. Maxwell, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, left his penthouse for his usual morning routine. As he stepped out of his building, his driver, James, was waiting with the car door open. "Good morning, Mr. Rothschild," James said with a nod. "The usual stop at Café Noir?" Maxwell nodded absently, his mind already on the day's meetings. The car glided through the morning traffic, a bubble of luxury insulating Maxwell from the city's chaos. At Café Noir, a trendy spot in the financial district, Maxwell got out, instructing James to wait. As he approached the cafe, Maxwell's attention was caught by a commotion near the entrance. A disheveled man was being forcefully escorted away by the cafe security guard. "I just wanted some water," the man was saying, his voice a mix of frustration and resignation. "It's so hot out here." Maxwell felt a flicker of annoyance. Why did these people have to make scenes in public places? He was about to walk past when the man turned, and Maxwell froze in his tracks. It was like looking in a mirror, a dirty, weathered mirror, but a mirror nonetheless. The man had the same high cheekbones, the same nose, even the same cleft chin that Maxwell saw every day when he shaved. The only significant difference was that this man's skin was a few shades darker than Maxwell's own. For a moment, Maxwell couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world seemed to narrow to this single point of connection. The homeless man, noticing Maxwell's stare, met his gaze. There was a flash of recognition there, too, a startled awareness of their uncanny resemblance. The spell was broken by the security guard's gruff voice. "Move along now. You can't be hassling the customers." Maxwell found his voice. "Wait," he said, surprising himself. "It's all right, he's with me." The security guard looked skeptical, but backed off. The homeless man stared at Maxwell, confusion evident on his face. "Thank you," he said cautiously. "But why?" Maxwell wasn't sure how to answer. He wasn't even sure why he had intervened. "You look like you could use some help," he said finally. "Would you like some breakfast?" The man hesitated, clearly wary of this unexpected kindness from a stranger, especially one who looked so much like him. But hunger won out over caution. "That would be very kind," he said. "I'm Marcus." "Maxwell," he replied, extending his hand before realizing it might not be welcome. But Marcus shook it firmly, his calloused palm a stark contrast to Maxwell's manicured hand. As they entered the cafe, Maxwell was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting. The maitre d' approached, a forced smile on his face. "Mr. Rothschild, your usual table?" Maxwell nodded, guiding Marcus to a secluded corner booth. As they sat down, the contrast between them couldn't have been starker. Maxwell in his expensive suit, Marcus in his threadbare clothes. Yet their similar features were unmistakable, creating a surreal image that had the other patrons whispering behind their menus. Marcus seemed overwhelmed by the menu, so Maxwell ordered for both of them, a full breakfast with all the trimmings. As they waited for their food, an awkward silence fell between them. "So," Maxwell said, grasping for something to say, "have you lived in New York long?" Marcus nodded. "Born and raised. You?" "Chicago originally, but I've been here for over 20 years now." The conversation stuttered along, neither man quite sure how to bridge the vast gulf between their experiences. When the food arrived, Marcus's eyes widened at the generous portions. He ate with a controlled desperation that spoke volumes about how long it had been since his last proper meal. As Maxwell watched Marcus eat, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Pity, certainly, but also a nagging sense of guilt and a growing curiosity. Who was this man who looked so much like him? What twists of fate had led their lives down such different paths? Before he could delve deeper into these thoughts, his phone buzzed insistently. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, reminding him of the board meeting he was now dangerously close to being late for. "I'm sorry," Maxwell said, standing abruptly. "I have to go. But please, finish your meal." He hesitated, then pulled out his wallet and placed several large bills on the table. "This should cover the bill and, well, anything else you might need." Marcus looked at the money, then back at Maxwell, a complex emotion in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. As Maxwell hurried out of the cafe, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. He didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his success, and the world he lived in. In the days following his encounter with Marcus, Maxwell found himself unable to shake the memory of their meeting. The image of Marcus, a man who could have been his twin, save for the darker skin and the ravages of a hard life, haunted him. He found himself distracted during meetings, his mind wandering to questions about Marcus's life, his story, and the uncanny resemblance between them. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite explain, Maxwell decided to do some digging. He tasked Sarah with finding out everything she could about Marcus Johnson. It was an unusual request, but Sarah, ever efficient, set to work without question. A week later, Sarah presented Maxwell with a file. "I found some information on Marcus Johnson," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "But sir, there's something you should know." Maxwell opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents inside. Marcus Johnson, born in New York City, 43 years old, former architect, fell on hard times after the 2008 financial crisis. But it was the next piece of information that made Maxwell's blood run cold. "This can't be right," he muttered, his hands shaking slightly as he reread the document. Sarah nodded solemnly. "I've triple-checked, sir. It's accurate." The paper in Maxwell's hand was a birth certificate, Marcus Johnson's birth certificate, and listed under father was a name Maxwell knew all too well, Maxwell Rothschild Sr. "My father?" Maxwell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that's impossible. He never mentioned. I never knew." Yet as the initial shock began to fade, pieces started falling into place. His father's frequent business trips to New York when Maxwell was a child. the tension in his parents' marriage that he'd never understood. The way his father would sometimes get a faraway look in his eyes, as if carrying a heavy secret. "There's more, sir," Sarah said gently, pointing to another document in the file. It was a letter written in his father's unmistakable handwriting, never sent. In it, Maxwell Sr. poured out his regret and love for the son he'd never acknowledged, explaining the complicated circumstances that had led to Marcus's birth and his absence from Marcus's life. Maxwell sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. Marcus wasn't just a look-alike stranger. He was Maxwell's half-brother, a brother who had been struggling on the streets while Maxwell lived in luxury. The revelation shook Maxwell to his core. He had always prided himself on his self-made success, on rising above his middle-class roots through his own hard work and determination. But now he was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that perhaps his path to success had been more privileged than he'd like to admit. After all, he'd had a stable home, good schools, and opportunities that Marcus, growing up without a father and in more challenging circumstances, had never had. As the full weight of the discovery settled on him, Maxwell felt a complex mix of emotions. Shock at the existence of a brother he'd never known, anger at his father for keeping this secret, guilt over the vast disparity in their lives, and beneath it all, a growing sense of responsibility. He thought back to his grandmother's words, "Never forget where you came from, and always reach back to help others up." For the first time in years, those words resonated with a new, profound meaning. Maxwell stood up abruptly, his decision made. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm with resolve, "clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I need to find Marcus. It's time we had a real conversation." As he left his office, Maxwell knew that his life would never be the same. The carefully constructed world he'd built for himself was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond business deals and profit margins. He had a brother to find, a relationship to build, and perhaps a chance to rediscover a part of himself he'd long forgotten. Maxwell's decision to find Marcus and reveal their connection was not one he took lightly. He spent a sleepless night weighing the potential consequences, both personal and professional. How would this revelation affect his carefully cultivated image? What would the board of Innovate Tech say if they knew their CEO had a homeless half-brother? More importantly, how would Marcus react to the news? Despite his reservations, Maxwell knew he couldn't ignore this newfound knowledge. The next morning, he set out to find Marcus, armed with the last known locations Sarah had uncovered in her investigation. It took the better part of the day, but Maxwell finally found Marcus in a small park, sketching on a tattered notepad. The sight of his half-brother, talented enough to create beauty even in his circumstances, stirred something in Maxwell's chest. "Marcus," he called out softly, approaching the bench. Marcus looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Maxwell, I didn't expect to see you again." Maxwell sat down beside him, acutely aware of the stark contrast between his tailored suit and Marcus's worn clothes. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice more uncertain than it had been in years. "It's important." Over the next hour, Maxwell explained everything. The research, the discovery of their shared father, the letter. Marcus listened in stunned silence, his expressive eyes reflecting a whirlwind of emotions, disbelief, anger, hurt, and a glimmer of something that might have been hope. When Maxwell finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I always wondered," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "My mom, she never talked about my father. But sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd get this sad, faraway look in her eyes. I guess now I know why." The two men sat in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Maxwell spoke. "I want to help you, Marcus. You're my brother. Let me get you off the streets, find you a job." But Marcus cut him off, his eyes flashing. "I don't need your charity," he said sharply. "I've made it this far on my own. I don't need a long-lost rich brother swooping in to save me." Maxwell was taken aback by Marcus's vehemence. He had expected gratitude, relief, not this fierce independence. "I'm not offering charity," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "I'm offering what you should have had all along. Family." Marcus scoffed. "Family? We share some DNA, that's all. You don't know me, Maxwell. You don't know my life, my struggles. You can't just walk in here with your fancy suit and your guilty conscience and expect to fix everything." The conversation devolved from there, years of unspoken resentment and vastly different life experiences, creating a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. Maxwell left the park feeling frustrated and oddly hurt. He had thought he was doing the right thing, but Marcus's reaction had thrown him completely off balance. Over the next few weeks, Maxwell made several more attempts to connect with Marcus, each ending in similar fashion. He offered money, jobs, housing, all rejected. Marcus's pride and independence, forged through years of hardship, wouldn't allow him to accept help that felt like pity. The situation began to take a toll on Maxwell's professional life. He was distracted during meetings, short-tempered with his staff. Rumors began to circulate about his frequent absences and mysterious meetings in less reputable parts of town. The board of Innovate Tech began to whisper about stability and leadership. Moreover, Maxwell found his worldview shifting. Every time he returned to his penthouse after seeing Marcus, the luxury that had once felt like a reward now felt hollow. He began to question the systems that had allowed him to accumulate such wealth, while others, including his own brother, struggled to survive. In a moment of frustration, Maxwell made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Without consulting his PR team or the board, he gave an interview to a prominent business magazine in which he revealed the existence of his homeless half-brother and criticized the vast wealth inequality in America. The fallout was immediate and severe. Innovate Tech's stock price took a hit as investors worried about Maxwell's focus and commitment. Conservative pundits attacked him as a hypocrite, while liberal ones questioned why he hadn't done more to help his brother sooner. Maxwell's carefully cultivated image as a self-made billionaire was shattered overnight. Amidst the media frenzy, Marcus retreated further, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Maxwell's attempts to reach out were now met with stony silence. As the consequences of his actions unfolded, Maxwell found himself at a crossroads. He had tried to do what he thought was right, but his efforts had seemingly backfired at every turn. His professional life was in turmoil. His newfound brother wanted nothing to do with him, and he was left questioning everything he had once held true. Yet beneath the chaos and uncertainty, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in years: a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, he was fighting for something more than just profits and market share. He was fighting for family, for justice, for a chance to right a wrong that had shaped both his and Marcus's lives. As Maxwell grappled with the fallout from his revelation, a secondary plot began to unfold. Sarah, his ever-loyal executive assistant, found herself in an unexpected position. She had always seen Maxwell as the epitome of success, a role model she aspired to emulate. But watching him struggle with his newfound brother and the moral quandaries it presented had shaken her worldview. Sarah began to question her own values and aspirations. Was the relentless pursuit of wealth and status truly the path to fulfillment? She thought of her own family, the siblings she rarely saw due to her demanding job, the parents whose calls she often let go to voicemail because she was too busy. Driven by a need to understand, Sarah started volunteering at a local homeless shelter on her rare days off. She didn't tell Maxwell, feeling oddly protective of this new part of her life. At the shelter, she met people whose stories were not so different from Marcus's. Former professionals who had fallen on hard times, individuals battling mental health issues or addiction, young people who had aged out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. As Sarah's eyes were opened to the realities of homelessness, she found herself becoming an unexpected advocate within Innovate Tech. She began subtly steering company donations towards organizations that addressed root causes of homelessness. In meetings, she would bring up potential impacts on vulnerable communities when discussing new projects or policies. Meanwhile, the media frenzy around Maxwell and Marcus's story had sparked a national conversation about wealth inequality and the myth of the self-made billionaire. Talk shows debated the ethics of extreme wealth in a society with widespread poverty. Op-eds dissected Maxwell's journey from middle-class kid to tech mogul, questioning how much of his success was due to talent and hard work, and how much was due to systemic advantages and sheer luck. This broader conversation began to influence policy discussions. Several politicians seized on the story, using it to push for increased estate taxes and more robust social safety nets. Others held it up as an example of personal responsibility, arguing that Marcus's situation was of his own making. In the tech world, Maxwell's peers were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about their own wealth and privilege. Some distanced themselves from him, while others were inspired to examine their own family histories and philanthropic efforts. As these larger forces swirled, Marcus found himself thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight. Journalists sought him out for interviews, homeless advocacy groups wanted him to be their spokesperson, and distant relatives suddenly came out of the woodwork claiming connection. Overwhelmed by the attention and still grappling with the revelation about his father, Marcus retreated further into himself. He changed his usual haunts, making it harder for Maxwell or anyone else to find him. The only person he maintained contact with was a fellow homeless artist named Jade, whose quiet strength and unwavering friendship became his anchor in the storm. Jade, a talented painter who had been on the streets since aging out of foster care, became a sounding board for Marcus as he wrestled with his feelings about Maxwell and their shared history. She encouraged him to use his art to process his emotions, leading to a series of powerful sketches that captured the complexity of his situation. As these various threads, Sarah's awakening, the national debate, Marcus's retreat, and Jade's influence began to intertwine, the stage was set for a deeper exploration of family, responsibility, and the true meaning of success. The story that had begun with a chance encounter between two lookalikes had grown into something much larger, touching lives far beyond Maxwell and Marcus's immediate circles. In the months following the public revelation of their relationship, Maxwell and Marcus's interactions were fraught with tension and misunderstanding. Maxwell, driven by guilt and a genuine desire to connect, continued to reach out, but his efforts often came across as patronizing or out of touch. Marcus, still fiercely independent and resentful of the upheaval in his life, alternated between angry outbursts and cold silences. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah, drawing on her experiences at the homeless shelter, suggested that Maxwell try meeting Marcus on his own terms. "Stop trying to fix his life," she advised. "Just listen to him. Try to understand his world." Taking this advice to heart, Maxwell began to approach their encounters differently. Instead of offering solutions or financial assistance, he simply asked Marcus about his day, his art, his experiences. At first, Marcus was suspicious of this change, but gradually he began to open up. One rainy afternoon, huddled under the awning of a closed shop, Marcus showed Maxwell some of his sketches. As Maxwell leafed through the tattered notebook, he was struck by the raw talent and emotion captured in each drawing. "These are incredible," he said softly. "You have a real gift, Marcus." For the first time, Marcus saw genuine admiration in his half-brother's eyes. Not pity, not guilt, but real respect. It was a small moment, but it marked a turning point in their relationship. As they began to talk more openly, both brothers found their preconceptions challenged. Maxwell learned of the daily struggles and small triumphs of life on the streets, gaining a new perspective on resilience and community. Marcus, in turn, began to see beyond Maxwell's wealth, recognizing the pressures and ethical dilemmas his brother faced in the corporate world. Their conversations often turned to their shared father. Together, they pieced together the complex man who had shaped both their lives in such different ways. Maxwell shared childhood memories, while Marcus spoke of the void his absent father had left. Through these discussions, they began to forge a bond based on their shared history and the mutual desire to understand their roots. As their relationship evolved, so did their interactions with the world around them. Maxwell, influenced by Marcus's perspective, began to approach his philanthropic efforts differently. He moved away from grand gestures and top-down solutions, instead focusing on grassroots organizations and initiatives driven by people with lived experience of homelessness. Marcus, inspired by Maxwell's business acumen, started to think more strategically about his art. With Jade's encouragement, he organized a small exhibition of artwork by homeless artists. The event, held in a community center, was modest but powerful, attracting attention from local art critics and gallery owners. The brothers' evolving relationship had ripple effects on those around them. Sarah, seeing the positive changes in Maxwell, found the courage to present him with a comprehensive proposal for corporate social responsibility initiatives at Innovate Tech. To her surprise, Maxwell not only approved her ideas, but also appointed her to lead the newly created Social Impact Division. Jade, initially wary of Maxwell's influence on Marcus, gradually came to appreciate the positive aspects of the brothers' connection. She and Marcus grew closer, their shared artistic passion blossoming into a tender romance that provided Marcus with a sense of stability he hadn't felt in years. Even the media narrative began to shift. What had started as a sensational story about a billionaire's secret brother evolved into a nuanced exploration of family, social responsibility, and the complexities of wealth and poverty in America. Maxwell and Marcus were no longer portrayed as merely a cautionary tale, but as two men genuinely trying to bridge a vast divide. There were still difficult moments. Old habits and hurts didn't disappear overnight. Marcus struggled with accepting help, still fearing that it would compromise his independence. Maxwell had to constantly check his impulse to try to control outcomes, learning to respect Marcus's choices, even when he disagreed with them. Yet with each conversation, each shared experience, the brothers moved closer to genuine understanding. They were building more than just a familial relationship. They were creating a partnership that had the potential to drive real change in how society viewed and addressed issues of wealth inequality and homelessness. As autumn turned to winter, Maxwell and Marcus stood together at the opening of a new shelter and job training center, a project they had collaborated on, combining Maxwell's resources with Marcus's insights and connections in the homeless community. Watching their vision come to life, both brothers felt a sense of pride and purpose that neither had expected to find in each other. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, they were truly walking it together. The culmination of Maxwell and Marcus's journey came on a chilly evening in December, at the grand opening of the Rothschild Johnson Center for Community Empowerment. The center, a state-of-the-art facility offering job training, housing assistance, mental health services, and art programs for the homeless community, represented the physical manifestation of the brothers' evolving relationship and shared vision. As guests began to arrive, a diverse mix of corporate executives, community leaders, social workers, and members of the homeless community, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. This was more than just the opening of another charity project. It was a bold statement about bridging societal divides and challenging preconceptions about homelessness and wealth. Maxwell and Marcus stood side by side at the entrance, greeting attendees. The contrast between them was still stark. Maxwell in a perfectly tailored suit, Marcus in a new but more casual outfit, but there was an undeniable similarity in their smiles, their gestures, the way they carried themselves. They looked, for the first time, truly like brothers. The evening progressed smoothly until it was time for the speeches. Maxwell took the podium first, his usual confidence tempered by a new humility. He spoke about his journey over the past year, about having his eyes opened to realities he had long ignored, and about the profound impact Marcus had had on his life and worldview. As Maxwell introduced Marcus, inviting him to speak, a commotion broke out at the back of the room. A group of protesters had managed to slip inside, carrying signs denouncing Maxwell as a hypocrite billionaire and accusing him of using Marcus for publicity. The room tensed, security moving to intercept the protesters. But before anyone could react, Marcus stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent, all eyes on this man who had gone from anonymity to the center of a national conversation. "I see you," Marcus said, his voice calm but powerful. "I was where you are not too long ago, angry, feeling unseen and unheard, believing that people like my brother were the enemy." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the protesters, the suited executives, his fellow members of the homeless community. "But what I've learned," he continued, "is that the real enemy isn't any one person or group. It's the barriers we put up between us, the assumptions we make about each other, the ways we fail to see our shared humanity." Marcus went on to speak candidly about his own journey, The initial resentment he'd felt towards Maxwell, the struggle to accept help without feeling diminished, the gradual realization that he had as much to offer his brother as Maxwell had to offer him. "This center," he said, gesturing around him, "isn't about a rich man's charity or a poor man's redemption. It's about what's possible when we truly see each other, when we combine resources with lived experience, compassion with action." As Marcus spoke, the energy in the room shifted. The protesters lowered their signs, listening intently. Maxwell, watching from the side, felt a swell of emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, love, a sense of witnessing something profound. Marcus concluded by addressing the protesters directly. "I invite you to put down your signs and come talk to us. Share your stories, your ideas. Be part of building something, instead of just tearing things down. That's what this place is about. All of us, together, finding a better way forward." As Marcus finished, the room erupted in applause. The protesters, visibly moved, set aside their signs. People who had been on opposite sides of the room began to mingle, to talk, to truly see each other. In that moment, surrounded by the tangible results of their unlikely brotherhood, Maxwell and Marcus shared a look of understanding. They had done more than just reconcile their past. They had created a new vision for the future, one that had the power to ripple out far beyond the walls of this center. In the wake of the center's opening and Marcus's powerful speech, Maxwell and Marcus found themselves at the heart of a renewed media frenzy. This time, however, the narrative had shifted. Instead of focusing on the sensational aspects of their story, reporters were deeply interested in their vision for addressing homelessness and wealth inequality. The brothers were invited to participate in a high-profile, televised town hall discussion on these issues. As they prepared for the event, both felt the weight of responsibility. They knew this was an opportunity to shape the national conversation, but they also recognized the complexity of the issues they were tackling. The town hall, held in a large auditorium, brought together a diverse audience: policymakers, activists, business leaders, and individuals with lived experience of homelessness. As the brothers took their seats on the stage, the tension in the room was palpable. The moderator, a respected journalist, opened with a pointed question for Maxwell. "You've gone from being the poster child for the self-made billionaire narrative to a vocal critic of wealth inequality. Some would say this is just an attempt to assuage your guilt or rehabilitate your image. How do you respond?" Maxwell paused, considering his words carefully. "I won't deny that guilt played a role in my initial actions," he said honestly. "But what began as guilt has evolved into a genuine understanding of my responsibility. I've realized that the self-made narrative is a myth. Yes, I worked hard, but I also benefited from advantages I didn't even recognize. A stable home, good schools, social connections. Meeting Marcus showed me how easily our paths could have been reversed." The conversation then turned to Marcus, who was asked about the challenges of transitioning from homelessness and his thoughts on long-term solutions. Marcus spoke eloquently about the need for comprehensive support systems, emphasizing the importance of mental health services, job training, and affordable housing. As the town hall progressed, the brothers found themselves navigating difficult questions and criticisms. A young activist challenged Maxwell on Innovate Tech's tax practices, questioning whether corporate philanthropy was enough when companies utilized loopholes to avoid paying their fair share. A conservative pundit argued that Marcus's story was an exception, and that most homelessness was the result of personal failings rather than systemic issues. Throughout it all, Maxwell and Marcus presented a united front, their responses complementing and building on each other. Maxwell addressed corporate responsibility, announcing a commitment to revisiting Innovate Tech's tax strategies and pledging to advocate for closing loopholes. Marcus countered the narrative of personal failings with statistics and personal stories, highlighting the myriad factors that can lead to homelessness. The most poignant moment came when a woman in the audience, her voice shaking with emotion, asked how she could help her own brother who had been living on the streets for years and refused all assistance. The auditorium fell silent as Marcus leaned forward, his eyes filled with compassion. "The hardest thing," he said softly, "is to accept help when you've convinced yourself you don't deserve it. Your brother needs to know that your love isn't conditional on him changing. Be there. Listen without judgment. And remember that recovery isn't a straight line. Maxwell added, and for those of us in positions of privilege, our job is to work on dismantling the systems that make it so difficult for people to get back on their feet. It's not about individual charity. It's about creating a society where everyone has a fair shot. As the town hall drew to a close, it was clear that while not everyone in the room agreed on all points, a meaningful dialogue had been opened. The brothers had managed to bridge divides, bringing together perspectives that often talked past each other. In the days that followed, clips from the town hall went viral. Maxwell and Marcus's story, once a scandal, had transformed into a powerful platform for change. Donations to homeless charities spiked. Politicians on both sides of the aisle began proposing new legislation to address wealth inequality and homelessness. However, with increased visibility came increased scrutiny. Conservative media outlets accused Maxwell of class betrayal and painted Marcus as an opportunist. Some homeless advocacy groups, while appreciative of the attention the brothers were bringing to the cause, worried about the narrative becoming too focused on their unique story at the expense of broader systemic issues. Maxwell and Marcus also faced personal challenges. Maxwell's board of directors was becoming increasingly concerned about his focus on social issues, fearing it was distracting from the company's core business. Marcus struggled with the pressure of being held up as a spokesperson for the homeless community, knowing that his experience didn't represent everyone's. Despite these pressures, the brothers remained committed to their cause. They knew that real change wouldn't come easily or quickly. There would be setbacks, criticisms, and moments of doubt. But they also knew that they had started something important, a conversation that was long overdue, a movement that had the potential to create real change. As they left the town hall that night, surrounded by a swirl of media and well-wishers, Maxwell and Marcus shared a quiet moment. "You know," Maxwell said, "a year ago, I thought I had all the answers. Now I realize I'm just beginning to understand the questions." Marcus nodded, a small smile on his face. "That's the thing about life on the streets," he replied. "It teaches you that certainty is a luxury none of us can really afford. We're all just doing our best with what we've got." The months following the town hall marked a turning point for both Maxwell and Marcus. The brothers realized that while they had made significant strides in raising awareness and sparking conversation, true systemic change would require a more focused, long-term approach. Maxwell, drawing on his business acumen, proposed a bold new initiative. He announced his intention to step down as CEO of Innovate Tech to focus full-time on addressing wealth inequality and homelessness. He would use a significant portion of his personal wealth to establish the Rothschild Johnson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to innovative solutions for these issues. The decision sent shockwaves through the business world. Some praised Maxwell's commitment, while others criticized him for abandoning the company he had built. But Maxwell was resolute. He had found a new purpose, one that felt more meaningful than any business success. Marcus, too, found himself at a crossroads. He had become a respected voice in discussions about homelessness, but he knew that his perspective, while valuable, was just one among many. He proposed that the foundation prioritize hiring people with diverse experiences of homelessness and poverty to ensure a wide range of voices were heard. Together, the brothers outlined a multi-pronged approach for the foundation. Policy advocacy, working with lawmakers to push for systemic changes in housing, healthcare, and social services. Education initiatives, developing programs to raise awareness about the root causes of homelessness and challenge stereotypes. Direct support, funding and implementing innovative housing and job training programs. Research, collaborating with universities to study effective interventions and track long-term outcomes. As they embarked on this new chapter, Maxwell and Marcus knew they were taking a risk. They were venturing into unfamiliar territory, tackling complex issues that had no easy solutions. But they also felt a sense of excitement and purpose that neither had experienced before. The Foundation's first major project was the creation of a transitional housing community that integrated affordable housing, job training, mental health services, and arts programs. It was a holistic approach that drew on both Maxwell's business savvy and Marcus's lived experience. As construction began on the project, the brothers stood at the site, surveying the bustling activity around them. Maxwell turned to Marcus, a question in his eyes. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked, a rare moment of vulnerability from the usually confident businessman. Marcus looked at his brother, then back at the construction site. "I don't know if it's the right thing," he said thoughtfully, "but it's a thing that needs doing, and we're in a position to do it. That's got to count for something." Maxwell nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They were on a new path now, one that neither could have imagined a year ago. It was uncertain, challenging, and at times overwhelming, but it was also profoundly meaningful, and they were walking it together. As the first year of the Rothschild-Johnson Foundation drew to a close, both Maxwell and Marcus found themselves in moments of deep reflection, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. Maxwell, sitting in his new office, a far cry from the sleek minimalist space he'd occupied at Innovate Tech, looked out over the city skyline. The view was the same, but his perspective had shifted dramatically. He thought back to the man he'd been just 2 years ago. Driven, successful, but ultimately unfulfilled. He had achieved every goal he'd set for himself, yet had felt an inexplicable emptiness. Now, despite the countless challenges and setbacks they'd faced in getting the foundation off the ground, Maxwell felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. He had learned to measure success not in dollars and cents, but in lives impacted and communities transformed. The business skills he'd honed over the years were now being put to use in service of a greater good, and it filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction. More than that, Maxwell had grown emotionally in ways he'd never anticipated. His relationship with Marcus had opened him up, teaching him the value of vulnerability and genuine connection. He had learned to listen, really listen, to perspectives different from his own, to challenge his assumptions, and to admit when he was wrong. The arrogance that had once been his armor had given way to a humility that made him a more effective leader and a better human being. Across town, in the small apartment he now shared with Jade, Marcus sat at his drawing table, sketching idly as he pondered the twists and turns of his life. The man he saw reflected in the mirror these days was a far cry from the angry, disillusioned person he'd been when he first met Maxwell. Marcus had always prided himself on his self-reliance, viewing any offer of help as a threat to his independence. But through his journey with Maxwell, he'd learned that true strength often lies in the ability to accept support and to lean on others. He had discovered that his voice and his experiences had value, that his perspective could shape policies and change minds. The anger that had once fueled him had transformed into a passionate drive for justice, tempered with a newfound empathy for those on all sides of the issue. He had learned to navigate the complex world of policy and philanthropy without losing touch with the realities of life on the streets. His art, once a solitary pursuit, had become a powerful tool for advocacy and healing. Both brothers had come to realize that their greatest growth had come through their connection to each other. Maxwell had learned the value of empathy and social responsibility from Marcus, while Marcus had gained a new perspective on systemic change and the positive potential of wealth from Maxwell. Together, they had become more than the sum of their parts, each making up for the other's blind spots and amplifying each other's strengths. As the sun set over New York City, casting a golden glow over the streets they both called home, Maxwell and Marcus each felt a profound sense of gratitude. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, the problems they sought to address deeply entrenched and complex. But they had found in each other not just a brother, but a partner, a friend, and a constant reminder of the change they sought to create in the world. They had started this journey as strangers, divided by circumstance and societal barriers. Now they stood united, their unlikely bond a testament to the power of empathy, understanding, and the enduring strength of family, both given and chosen. As the Rothschild-Johnson Foundation celebrated its first anniversary, Maxwell and Marcus stood side by side, addressing a crowd of supporters, beneficiaries, and media. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter on a busy New York street had blossomed into a movement that was slowly but surely changing lives and challenging deeply ingrained societal norms. Maxwell, his voice filled with emotion, spoke of the transformative power of empathy and the importance of looking beyond surface differences to recognize our shared humanity. "A year ago," he said, "I thought success was about personal achievement. Today, I know it's about the positive impact we can have on others." Marcus, his artistic sensitivity evident in his words, described their journey as a canvas on which they were all painting together. "Each of us holds a brush," he said, "and every act of kindness, every moment of understanding, adds color and depth to the masterpiece of our shared future." As they concluded their speech, the brothers embraced, their physical resemblance now mirrored by a deep spiritual connection. Their story had become a powerful metaphor for the possibility of bridging divides, challenging assumptions, and finding common ground in unexpected places. The scene served as a poignant reminder that in a world often divided by wealth, race, and circumstance, the things that unite us are ultimately stronger than those that divide us. It reinforced the idea that real change begins with genuine connection and understanding, and that even the most unlikely partnerships can become catalysts for profound social transformation. As Maxwell and Marcus looked out at the diverse crowd before them, they saw not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of many more. A future full of challenges, but also brimming with hope and possibility.